How's it going, everybody? We're on episode 2 of KrakenCares. And today we're going to dive a little bit more into the philosophy side of things, but we're going to talk a little bit about truth and, what that is, how you define it, how does someone necessarily use true statements to be dishonest or not necessarily dishonest, but more so, um, trying to word this properly here using the truth to be deceptive in a way, right? How you can say true statements while still deceiving someone. Um, Before we get all into all that, you guys can go ahead and follow me on all the socials. Chosen Juan 285 on Instagram and Twitter. And if you guys have anything that you would like to hear me talk about or come on and discuss yourself, eventually we'll get to a point where it's more than just me spreading my thoughts on things. So let's get into this. First and foremost, it comes to the question of, what is truth, right? And a lot of people in today's society tend to confuse, an experience for the truth, right? And when you look down or when you look up, look at what the truth is, uh, there's a lot of different connotations that come with it. When you look at it from a religious aspect, there's the overwhelming truth, and that's whatever the most powerful deity and whatever it is that you believe in is, and what brings you closer to that is the truth. And then there's, an event that happens, and many people will confuse their experience of said event for the truth. While that may be true for them, it's not necessarily the truth, hence the statement. Every time people will constantly say there's three sides to every story, right? Your side, their side, and the truth. And nobody feels that they're inherently lying or being dishonest, but your experience doesn't always equate to the truth of what is happening. So we're gonna dive a little bit more into that, and that's a lot to take in right now. So we'll give you a second to pause, think about that for a little bit before we move forward, right? So when talking about truth, you also have to talk about honesty, right? And for me, honesty are or honesty is when you speak or conduct yourself in a manner that more closely aligns with the truth. Now, I'm not saying your experience, but we're talking about the truth. So, how can someone be dishonest while still telling truths? Well, that's where you get into the differentiation between the truth versus a truth, right? A truth can be simply a true statement, but the truth is a little bit broader of an aspect. So when you're talking about an event, notice I said event, not an experience here. An event simply happens, right? And the closer your description of said event is to the objective event, not your experience of it, the closer to the truth you are. So you can tell a recount of said event that closely aligns with your experience of it while not necessarily lying, but it's not really the truth either. We'll dive into that a little bit in a second. But before we go any further, I want to bring up a great book that I read, and it's called Loser Think, right? And when we talk about Loser Think, or in Loser Think, he talks about arguments or disagreements. And for the purpose of this, I think it's really important to dive into that because when you argue with someone or you have a disagreement, you have a tendency to argue and you want to win. You want to be right. You want to convince the other person of your experience, that your experience aligns closer to the truth of what happened than theirs does. It's typically what happens. But when you argue or you disagree in this way, it inherently makes one person the winner, one person the loser. And when it comes to the matter of the truth, that makes one person dishonest and one person more honest, which is why so many people argue so fiercely. Now, when you're talking about that, nobody wants to inherently believe that they're dishonest. Nobody wants to inherently believe that they're misleading or deceptive, which is why arguments can get so heated. But in this book, Loser Think, it talks about disagreeing and communicating while disagreeing without the purpose of winning, but more so to reach a mutual understanding. And that's really more the format that I would like this channel to go is I don't want anyone to view these episodes as an attack on their experience. More so, I want to broaden the horizon for you, broaden your mind so that we can all better understand each other. And I believe that through better understandings of each other, we can not only come into a more peaceful existence, but also exist with contrary beliefs or understandings. But by understanding each other's point of view, that doesn't necessarily have to become combative, right? You can disagree and still not argue. Anyway, so moving into it, when it comes to truth, modern, especially in today's USA, modern people seem to be a little bit confused on a lot of things. And to lead into that, we're going to talk about how people can either knowingly or unknowingly, consciously or unconsciously, do things in which they're not necessarily lying, but they are stating a true statement with the intent to deceive, right? I'm going to go to the base example of this, like a really simple example that I'm sure many of you have dealt with. Say you're in a relationship, right? And you ask your partner, or your partner somehow tells you, "Oh, I'm out with a friend," right? That's a true statement, but it's not necessarily the truth of what is going on, right? So, say your partner is out with a friend of the opposite gender or whatever it is that person is attracted to, and that friend fits that category. Now, yeah, you've stated a truth, right? But it's not necessarily honest, right? Because now you have other questions, right? Your questions are, well, what's the nature of your relationship with this friend? Has this friend at any point had romantic interest? Does this friend think that there is any possible way in which it will be more than a friendship, right? And your partner probably knows the answer to all of these questions, but they're choosing not to tell you, which is deceptive, right? Now we're moving into this moral gray area of, well, I didn't lie. Yes, you did not lie, but you were being deceptive. You were intentionally not giving all the information or not giving the full truth so that you could achieve some other goal, right? And I think that's a really important nuance to take note of because now we get into why is it that people lie, right? Or deceive or whatever. I call all of that lying. For me, omitting information is equivalent to lying, right? Clearly, there's nuance within that, but we're speaking broad because I'm not trying to talk for hours right now. So, why is it that people lie? And I heard a really good quote, and it was told to me. I don't know who initially said it, but a man that I lovingly refer to as my big brother told me that people lie because they're afraid, right? So when you're lying or you're being deceptive, it means that you are afraid of the consequence of the truth, So when people are lying or being deceptive, it's in some form or another a way to escape accountability or consequence for the truth of the situation. And then it gets into, well, why do you fear it? And that's another rabbit hole that you can go down to. But speaking in very broad terms here, simply because it's meant to make you think about this for yourself, and then you can go about living your life the way that you want to live, right? Um, so now we get into this distinction between honesty and dishonesty, right? And when you are doing these things, when you're making statements to avoid telling the full truth of something, does that inherently make you a dishonest person? Well, that depends on how you would define dishonesty. And in this book, Loser Think brings up another really great point that I think we should all carry in our day to day lives. When it gets to a point when you're disagreeing with someone and you have to argue definitions of things, one, it's a way to stay further away from the root cause of the disagreement. But two, if you're having disagreements upon the definitions of things, it ties into your own experience, right? Because there is the denotation, which is the literary definition of something, and then the connotation, which is what many people use as a definition, the connotation of something. And this is present throughout history. In your lifetime alone, I'm sure that there's been words that meant something different when you were younger, right? Like the term bad, right? Now, like, oh, that's a bad man. Now you're like, oh, that's a bad man. There's different things like that. And that's just a really simple example of it. But we get into back to the question is, how can someone be dishonest or misleading or deceptive while still being truthful, right? And it's really not as hard as many people think, you know. There's a great statement that I've started using is like, you can state facts without telling the truth. The simplest way to do so is to answer in a way that doesn't truly address the question, right? If I say, what were you doing in the context of a romantic relationship, mind you? They come home late, whatever. Say, well, what were you doing? Oh, I was out with a friend. That's not really answering the question, right? It's stating a true statement that may or may not appease your partner or, delay the inevitable, but it's not truly answering the question. And it's also not being necessarily truthful. That's up to your own discernment, right? How does that tie into the greater concept of here of the truth and then being dishonest while still not lying, right? We build into that by going into experience, right? And your experiences, for better or worse, form you in some way, and they also form how you kind of view the world and how you move about in the world that you live in. And in a book that I recently read, it made a really good thing about experience as well. And it says, experience is an event tied to an emotion. And I really wanted to expand on that because, with regards to what I said earlier about events and the truth, right? Two people can experience the same event and have a very different memory of it, right? And to each of those people, their experience of said event is true. You can't deny that. Like their reality, that's what happened with regards to them. But it brings up the point that their experience of an event is usually linked to how they felt in that time. So if you can't separate your feelings from what objectively happened, then you're automatically not being completely truthful. And that's something that we all can work on. Everyone can work on. It's very hard to separate our experience from an event, but always try to remember that an event is objective. An event is what happened. Your experience is inherently subjective. So when you're arguing with someone or you feel that you're being deceived or lied to, it's always best to extend grace and honor the other person's experience while also stating your experience as well. And maybe by comparing the two, you can get a little bit closer to that ever elusive truth, right? So when I look at what it means to be an honest person, you can still be somewhat dishonest by never intentionally lying or having the intent of deception. You're simply relaying your experience. But the more your experience is tied to your emotion, or the more an event is tied to your emotion, the less realistic it truly is. That's my thoughts. There's actually a deeper discussion I'd love to have with someone. So, anybody watching this, if you have any disagreements, put them in the comments and I'll expand on them in my journal. Probably won't bring it up on here, but it'll lead to some great discussions, right? So, moving forward, this is the point that I really wanted to talk about today. And it's this modern notion of the term my truth, right? I absolutely hate this phrase. I believe that when you say something is my truth, you are simply escaping accountability, which, as I've stated before, is the whole reason for lying, deception, and why people are overall dishonest. It is to escape accountability in some way. Why? Because they are afraid. Afraid of what? That's between them and whatever they believe in, right? But typically, in my own experience, and maybe some of you have experienced otherwise, but generally people benefit from lying or dishonesty or escaping accountability for the truth. They benefit from that by removing fear of the outcome. And when you live your life in fear, one, it leads to a life of escaping accountability, which I'm going to let you guys in on a little secret. It always catches up to you, some way, shape, or form. But two, you have to admit to yourself that you're a coward. And I don't know very many people that make that a good attribute, a net good thing to be. But if you do, you're probably not someone I want to hang out with anyway. Still love you, probably just don't like you very much. So we'll leave that there and move on. Get back on topic. But when you remove fear, right, or when you don't take counsel of your fears, it allows you to live a more honest life, right? But ultimately, in your human experience, it boils down to your own personal accountability, right? You can't have honesty, you can't have truth without accountability in some respect, in some regard, right? Now, when it comes to this statement of, well, that's my truth, right? as we stated before, your truth, if it is inherently subjective or it's based off of your experience, it's inherently subjective. And if something is subjective, it's the opposite, or it's not the opposite, it's not objective. And the truth is always objective. So when you're saying my truth to combat or to circumvent someone else's reality or some event or something that is objective, your truth is inherently a lie. Maybe not maliciously, or may the degree to egregiousness of it may not be as severe, but it's not completely in line with the objective truth. Your reality is always in some degree separate from the objective event that took place. So these are just some of my brief thoughts on it. We're right at about 20 minutes now, and that's kind of a short version of it. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, comments, concerns on this topic, and you know, maybe maybe just one person out there will take some of my thoughts and apply that to their own life, and maybe you can live your life a little bit more honestly. I think that's what we should all strive for. I believe the world would be a much better place if we were all doing that. But that's it for today. That wraps up episode 2. Um, if you would like some input onto these episodes, you have any tips or any format changes you would like to see, go ahead and follow me on socials and comment, or you can comment underneath this video. But on all socials, it is Chosen Juan 285. And eventually we'll get to a point where we just start making these episodes based off of your guys' likes, comments, concerns, dislikes, whatever. Ultimately, like to discuss things, change some perspectives, and hopefully get everybody living a little bit happier and healthier. So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share. If you found any of this compelling, share it to your friends, and maybe you guys can have some good discussions on it. But let me know what you think. And as always, KrakenCares. Let's go and finish.